Today I want to welcome Chris Szado, and it's not spelled like it sounds. It's a wild name, Szad, pronounced Shadow. Chris is a leading expert in sales excellence strategy and organizational transformation. I took that from his bio, and I'm just going to throw it away. It sounds like everything else you've heard about sales in the few minutes I've had chance to talk with Chris. This is not going to be your average sales conversation. This is going to be awesome. I'm looking forward to it. Some of the things Chris likes to talk about is clarity in language, and he says sales is all about language. And one of the things I love that Chris said is that he wants to have strong opinions on things held loosely. And so we're going to talk about that. Stay tuned. I think you're going to really enjoy this conversation. Chris, welcome.
Well, it's great to be here, Craig. Really nice to meet you. I've been excited about this for a little while now.
Yeah. So you grew up in Canada? Did you grow up in the Vancouver area?
Yeah, I grew up on Vancouver Island, and yeah, I lived in Nanaimo, and I've been in Vancouver now for decades.
Okay. And you talked about doing something that I normally associate with Alaska, but you did it from Canada. You did some high stakes fishing.
Maybe Craig, I'll give you a bit of my bio in three parts really quickly. So I have kind of an unconventional background when it comes to corporate sales and being in the corporate world. And I got here in a very complicated sort of way. I started working on a commercial fishing boat. It was my dad's family business. So I grew up in entrepreneurial resource-based industry. And at 8 years old, when you're on a commercial fishing boat in the North Pacific, you learn a lot quick. So I spent 20 summers working on that boat. Every every summer vacation, the summer vacation corresponds perfectly with the fishing season. So I would be every summer on the boat working. And that ended up becoming a full-time job. I ended up running the crew by the time I was 16, 17. And then it became my career until I was 28, which allowed me a lot of freedom in terms of what I could study. I loved university. So while I was working on the boat, I was also attending school and studying whatever I wanted. I ended up getting out of school, became a high school teacher, loved teaching, but hated public sector systems. And I was at a real crossroads. How do I take this entrepreneurial experience in conjunction with my teaching experience and make a difference? And in a very lucky circumstance, I ended up getting a job in the pharmaceutical industry. And that launched me into the world of sales, sales strategy, building companies, and now having my own sales consultancy. So that's how I got to sit in the seat that I'm sitting in now.
Wow. Well, and boy, there's a lot there that I want to explore. The first thing is what type of fishing were you doing? What
So
kind
we
of
did a
fish?
lot of different kinds of fishing. So shrimp, salmon, halibut, and some variations of other fisheries, but those are the primary ones. So long lining, trolling, and trawling.
Okay. So my picture of halibut is anytime you reel one in, you're pulling a gun out and shooting it in the head. Did you have to do that?
When you're catching them in shallower water, yes, that is a genetically perfect creature. They're so powerful. It's incredible. But when you're working in a commercial application, they come from very, very deep and they come to the surface quickly, which calms them down a lot. So you're not shooting any of them in the head at that point.
I bet that's a little disorienting. I mean, that's a massive pressure change.
From, 600 feet underwater to sea level, yeah, that's gonna mess some stuff up.
Yeah. Which was your favorite? What you enjoyed the most?
Oh, salmon fishing by far. Hook and line, trolling, everything's by hand. Each fish is literally pulled in like this. And it's a very high quality product, incredibly sustainable kind of fishery, and just a wonderful business beginning to end.
Yeah. You know, the most boring fishing I've ever done is herring fishing in Oresund, which is the body of water between Denmark and Sweden. And you have a rig of like 6 shiny hooks, no bait. And you just dip the hooks in the water and your line starts shaking and shakes some more. And you just keep it down there until you feel like it's shaking enough. Then you pull it up and you have herring on most of the hooks.
Yeah, herring is a boring but incredible fishery as well. I've been a part of that too, and you literally have hours, not days, not weeks. You have hours to catch your whole quota for exactly that reason, Craig. They all school, really easy to catch them, but boring.
Yeah. I was on a head boat and I ended up hooking somebody on the other side of the boat, and that was the most exciting moment of the day. So anyway, I mean that's fascinating. I didn't realize, I mean, not too much of a surprise considering how far north you are. I just normally consider fishing, the type of fishing that you're talking about being very much of an Alaskan thing. And, when I was in college, I was looking for a summer job one year and there was a recession. It was hard. And I was actually getting ready to explore working on a, commercial fishing boat in Alaska over the summer, and then ended up getting another job on campus in the last minute. But I would imagine, there's a very romanticized view of fishing. Everything I see is that's very hard work.
Yeah, it is. It's very hard work. It is the most dangerous job per capita in the world. And you learn a lot about leadership, consequence, discipline, and accountability. And it's fascinating because you wouldn't immediately think that there'd be a lot of parallels or overlap between working on a commercial fishing boat and navigating the corporate world and the world of leadership. However, it was an incredible training ground for me to be doing what I'm doing now. And the insights, and what's fascinating, Craig, is all of the business lessons that I learned in that entrepreneurial experience, which was brutal, were only affirmed when I got into the corporate world. And what was also fascinating was the first meeting that I ever had with a business unit director, and I'll never forget this, at Janssen Ortho. I was like, oh, okay, that's the difference between being an entrepreneur and working in the corporate world. And I'd love to tell you that story.
Yeah, no, let's shoot. Let's go for it.
So it was my final interview to get this new sales job for a new launch product that they were super excited about. I had no idea. I knew nothing about medicine. I was just green as grass. But they wanted to hire, they did this really interesting experiment. They wanted to see who was going to do a better job. People that were green, who they trained as salespeople who knew nothing about medicine, or were the people who had experience in medical sales going to beat people that had never sold before? And I was one of the people they were looking at. And we are sitting in the interview, and I was telling him the story about working on the boat. And this was like almost 25 years ago, maybe longer. And he goes, wow, it sounds like that's really high consequence. And I'm like, yeah, it really was. And he goes, in the pharmaceutical industry, if we make a $5 million mistake, we call that part of the learning curve. And he
Hmm.
laughed. And I didn't find that funny at all. As an entrepreneur working in that world, I'm like, if we make a $500,000 mistake, that's not just a bad year, that's the legacy of my family. That was a little cavalier hearing the business unit director of a massive organization say 5 million is part of the learning curve. And that's where I started to learn the differences. Ownership versus working for a corporation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that reminds me of way back when, you remember the Palm Pilots when they had those?
Yep, yep.
Yeah. So they got bought by HP. And HP said, hey, we're going to be in this market. And they had a tablet coming out. And they spent, a couple billion buying Palm Pilot. And right at about the 1 year anniversary mark of doing them, and if you're buying a company of that size, your first year is purely integration, getting them into your culture and figuring all of that out. And HP decided this is probably in the right market for us. And so they wrote off the entire division, another billion or two. And I just remember looking at that and I was just like, that's more money than my business will make in the lifetime. And I can't afford to make that size of mistake.
Right. Exactly.
Not even close. Wow. And I think that's, I mean, I think, yeah, it's nice to have the luxury to make that kind of mistake, but I think a lot of, certainly in America, I'm not going to speak for Canada, but for America, small business is the engine of America. And, much smaller mistakes, like you said, that would be the end of the company.
Yeah, the being an entrepreneur is really precarious. And understanding the consequence changes how you work. Objectivity becomes a really different thing. The way you work with people is far more consequential and deeply, deeply serious. Now, I'm the kind of person that when people in job interviews and cultures, oh, we don't take ourselves very seriously, I'm like, that's not me. No, that is not me. I take work very, very seriously. And one of the things that we really focus on when we're working with people is what is the level of seriousness with which you're taking what you're doing? Are you genuinely, however much you say you're caring, however much you're innovating and growing, are you really taking this seriously? And that's where we always start with people is assessing, okay, what is the attitude and how is that attitude relating to process and behavior?
And so I'm a consultant as well. More on the marketing side, but one of my frustrations, it's a gift, but it's also a frustration when I look into a company and I'm like, guys, you got your priorities all wrong. And, I've learned the hard way. I can't go in and just bluntly say, guys, you have your priorities all wrong. They're like, oh, you mean bastard, go away. And that's just me. And that may be my personality, but sometimes they're they're not being serious about the things they're supposed to just because they're not serious people. But sometimes it's just they're blind. They don't see it. They don't realize. How do you see that split working out and how do you work through that with folks?
Yeah, so really great question. And let me rephrase it just to make sure I'm getting it right. As consultants, our job is to tell people that their baby is ugly and they really like that we tell them that. That's a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
How do we have that conversation? And, I've been navigating that for a long time. And how I typically did that was to ask very, very simple questions. So, what is your where? Do you know your how? And asking executive teams these really simple questions, but that is not a great way to do it. Because if
Okay.
people don't know in the simplest way what's happening, it's really going to put them on their back foot. So there's a lot of other ways that we're working with people right now from an assessment perspective to allow them to see what the issues are before I point them out directly.
You know, that's so funny. And I want to explore where here in a second because I think some folks are confused about that. But
Mm,
the the dumbest argument I ever had with my wife was I had just woken up from a 6 week coma and I wanted to leave the hospital. And she said, you can't walk. And I was like, I can too. And we go back and forth about whether or not I could walk. The evidence was all in her favor. I wasn't strong enough to lift my arms or legs. I wasn't strong enough to hit the nurse's call button. And I had a tube shooting out of my throat tied to a machine next to the bed. All the evidence was in her favor. And she kept hitting me with more and more evidence saying, Craig, you're wrong. You can't walk. Look at the facts. And I wasn't persuadable. And I feel like sometimes when we just come to our clients and we try to do that, I feel like we run into the same barrier. It's not about facts, it's about them realizing for themselves, hey, I've got a problem here, but under our guided questions.
You know, let's pick up on that because I think that's a really cool place to be. Because when you're working with people and when you're working in the world of persuasion, which is what everybody is doing, we're all trying to persuade people. And maybe we can talk about the difference between persuasion and convincing down the street a little bit. But looking at this issue right now, when someone's coming to you in an emotional way and they're in an emotional place, hitting them with evidence, it's not it they're not in a place where they can hear it. You got to manage the emotion first, and you always got to meet emotion with commensurate emotion, or else you're just not listening to someone. They're gonna roll over you, or you're gonna roll over them. So it's really important to make sure that we're able to appropriately empathize and label what's happening, to acknowledge what's happening with that person as you're literally telling them that your worldview is wrong. They're
Mm-hmm.
gonna have a response. And we got to acknowledge that and be really sensitive to it.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. The next argument that didn't happen was when I told my wife I wanted my phone so I could text people. She knew I couldn't use my phone. She didn't argue with me. She's like, sure. She pulls it out of her pocketbook, puts it in my hands. I stare at it for 5 minutes and realize I don't know how to unlock it. And I hand it back to her. Argument one.
That, first of all, that story of your recovery and what you went through, great. It's incredible. And the fact that you're laughing about it now is also a testament to where you're at. However, that's a wonderful technique. Just agree. Okay,
Yeah.
let's see. For sure. You're in the driver's seat. Let's go. I'm right here, but you're gonna drive. And when people come to their own conclusions, they don't question those conclusions. So it's very much about allowing people or meeting people where they are at and being very respectful of that. And I know that everybody talks about that, but to action it is a really different thing and much harder than one would think.
For me, I struggle with patience
Mm.
because I see the answer. I want to get to the answer quickly. And I've learned the hard way that the quickest way there is the slowest way there.
That is so well said. It is so well said. The quickest way is the slowest way there because that determination is on the person you're working with, not on you. And I share your frustration with that. However, what I've learned is the process is infinitely more important than the solution. If you're able to sit in that place of strategy, because I have a lot of frameworks that I work through, and the most important thing is to identify the goal and your where, which I know we're going to talk about. And then what are the problems to get to the where? And that's a very rich conversation, which provides insight. And that is where we sit, discussing the insights in relation to the problem. And the more time we spend navigating the problem and deeply understanding it, the solution will appear. The solution will emerge.
Yeah. And I think that's key. I love everything you just said that, the process is so important. And it's trusting the process will reveal truth. The process will point them in the direction of truth. And just having the trust that, you know, that they'll get there, and when they do, when it's their belief, um, for me, I talk a lot about autonomy, about the importance of preserving people's autonomy. You've protected their autonomy. They're in full control of their autonomy, which gives them the freedom to choose the right answer.
Wow, that's a big topic, and again, that was very well said. It reminds me of psychological safety, the prerequisite for people to be able to be in that place, to be empowered in that way. And yes, I completely agree. The process the process will reveal the answers because, truth is a very funny word right now. And, you know, the truth is always simple. People are really complicated. And we
Hmm.
work really hard to focus on the truth, to get to the truth, to get to the core, to get to the real root and foundation of what's happening. And when you boil the ocean and all you have is the distilled problem, then you're able to start talking about the truth. But until then, all the biases, all the different perspectives, not being able to see the forest for the trees, we have to remove all of that and make sure we're all on the same page and like, yes, that is the truth and that is our problem. Because often we're solving the wrong problems.
So let me ask this, and I'm going to go back to the fishing boat. There are times when you're looking at a mate on the boat and he's about to put his hand around a line that's going to take him overboard
Mhm.
or something bad. You don't have a whole lot of time to be persuasive. And so that's, we're not all on fishing boats, but we do run into situations where we don't have time to be persuasive, where there are legit emergencies. You must change direction now. If you do not change direction, bad things are going to happen. How do you identify those and how do you make that switch? Or how do you navigate that in when you're not on the fishing boat?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And this relates to business and culture. It overlaps completely. And I'm really curious what you think about this. So you never worry about that problem in the moment. You have to prepare yourself for that because you know it's going to happen. You know there's going to be circumstances that are really dangerous and consequential. And if people do not know how to behave, if we do not have standards in terms of what our best practices are, people will not be coming home. And look, objectivity is really, really simple in that world. It's really, really simple. We have one problem. We have a boat and it is empty, and we can only go home when it is full. So everything we're doing is oriented to an incredibly clear and specific objective. And there are behaviors that everyone is responsible to, and a deep, deep, deep understanding of what performance looks like. So when you're in that situation and things are falling apart, like, you know, we've been hit by lightning, we've had fires on board, we've been seconds away from being crushed by super tankers, and in those situations, there's no talking. Everyone's just acting because we know what to do, because we've drilled it, we've practiced it. And more than anything, the trust that we've established because of our standards is what we rely on.
Hmm. Yeah. Wow. There's so much there. Let's poke at trust
Mm,
because trust trust overcomes a lot. You know, you can yank somebody by the collar and yank them away, even if it's pulling somebody out of a customer meeting. If you have the trust, if they know that what you're doing is in your mutual best interest and you're not, they trust you to not harm them unnecessarily. And I think that's, I've had accounts. I know one guy and the business eventually went under. He couldn't fire his top sales guy. He was addicted to the revenue. But his top sales guy was a problem. There was not trust. And this guy acted in an untrust. He acted in unethical ways. And um and so I think one of the things businesses have to do, and it's hard, is you have to have these standards like you were talking about, that you know what, there's lines if you cross, you won't be working here anymore. And those lines create safety for others. It creates that element of trust that you're talking about.
Can we linger on that creating safety for others piece? Because that is so, so critical when it comes to leadership and navigating the present moment.
Yeah.
You know, the ability for us to be able to keep other people safe in both of our worlds is very clear. And that is all about competence, performance, and standards. We cannot make the people around us safe if we do not have objectivity, clarity, and alignment in terms of where we're going, how we're getting there, and what we do. And we cannot talk about it enough. The more we talk to each other about strategy based on an uncompromising understanding of the mission and where, the more we will empower each other. And it's also fascinating because that kind of discipline and clarity ironically creates creativity. People start thinking out of the box. Everybody knows where we're going. What's a cooler way to get there? And we're always testing that strategy. We're always using all of our tactics and tools to test the hypothesis. It's never fixed. So there's something really powerful in that that makes companies great. And that's where the differentiation lies.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. And I think, a lot of times, kind of the common axiom is when we make decisions out of fear, it's usually a bad decision. And for this one guy, the fact that he went and fired his top sales guy created an ongoing problem that eventually took the company down.
It reminds me of the Machiavelli quote. People do things for two reasons, love or fear.
Mm,
You know, which one are we tapping into? Are we scared or are we excited? And there's a real confusion right now around anxiety and where anxiety should go. You better be anxious when you're doing something cool and new, but you can't be terrified. And there's a really interesting inflection point, and we talk about that a lot with clients around what's appropriate anxiety and then what is wrong fear. Because we do not want people in situations where they are uncomfortable because they're not prepared. We want people in situations where they are deeply prepared and anxious about the fact that, wow, I'm now going to perform. So there's a distinction there. Does that sort of come through? Do you see that distinction between
abs-
anxiety and fear?
yeah, absolutely. When I talk about, when people say, "Oh, he's fearless," I'm like, only a truly stupid person is fearless. There are
Mhm.
things that should scare you.
Yeah.
Courage, on the other hand, is taking action in the presence of fear. And without fear, there is no such thing as courage. So we can take courageous steps, whether it's firing somebody who's a top performer because they cross some line, or maybe in a sales situation, it's declining a piece of business because of a higher principle that will imperil your company. And that's scary. Walking away from revenue is scary.
Craig, and that's the point that we're at right now because it's been really interesting. Taking every client, we don't do anymore. Garnering alignment in terms of value system is the most important prerequisite to be able to work with someone that we've determined. And the more your attitudes and value systems align, man, that is just the oil that reduces the friction to be able to create that trust. The more the value systems aligned and the more that we understand each other's missions and are able to communicate around it, it's just oil. It makes everything easy. And I'm thinking right now, two founders that I've worked with in very, very similar businesses. One, this guy, this guy's extraordinary. The other, we just could not have a conversation. And it's totally okay to work with people and say, you know what? love what you're doing, but the vibes just aren't there.
Yeah.
And you gotta have that vibe with someone to be able to do the heavy, deep, consequential work that we do.
Yeah, absolutely. There's one thing that we've been skirting around, we've been touching on it a few times, and I want to make sure we cover this before we wrap up. But you keep talking about where.
Mm. Mhm.
And so let me set it up a little bit, because we talked about this in the green room. There's that famous Simon Sinek video, Start With Why. And I have to admit, I use that specific video frequently in work with clients, especially when we're trying to work on their branding.
Mhm.
But for you, you're like, I care a lot less about the why. I care more about the where. Help me understand that.
Yeah, really great question. So Simon is awesome. And I completely understand the why when you're talking about marketing, because you're already a place where you're like, okay, why are we doing this? And you cannot answer that question unless you know where you're going.
Hmm.
So the where is your objective. How do we know that our objectives are right? And how do we clarify our objectives? And once you clarify your objective and you know your where, your North Star, and where you're going, as a leader and visionary, you need to talk about that like a broken record. And when people start getting sick of it, that's when you talk about it more. There is nothing you can do that will be a mistake when you're telling everybody what your where is, because they know. And now they can align their why to the organizational where. So I think we should start with where when we're working in it and we're brainstorming, because we need to have objectivity. And then we need to be sure, and we cannot spend enough time on clarity to garner that alignment. Once we have that alignment, the whys are going to come fast and furious.
Yeah.
But that where is fundamental for us. And we spend a lot of time with C-suites determining, okay, do we know your where? And then do you know what everybody's going to be doing, what the delegation is of that, and what is the problem that you're owning to get us to the where? So I can talk about that for a very, very long time. But yeah, in a nutshell, that's sort of the philosophy behind where.
Well, and something you said reminded me of a CEO I worked for back in corporate America. And one of the things I noticed about him was he kept saying the same thing again and again and again. And my natural temperament is once I tell you once, I assume you heard me, which is not the correct belief. But I was like, okay, there's a reason he's CEO and I'm not. What is he doing? What has he figured out? And he would just communicate again and again and again. And that's what I'm hearing you say in this where. Once you figure out the where, don't rest for a second assuming everybody heard you and understands that. Part of leadership is just continually, you know, I love what did you say? Once you're convinced everybody understands it, say it more.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you start annoying people with your where, that's when you know you have to talk about it even more. Because now people are thinking. It's on their mind. It's like a stop sign in their brain. It's like white elephant. Like, man, I know. Well,
Yeah.
because what do we hire people for? What do we have people for? We have them for their opinions. We need people to have really strong opinions about what we're doing because that's why we hire people. Your opinion is so valuable in that context. So a really big part of leadership is allowing everybody to know what the where is so they can spend all their time talking about the how to get that leader to shut up, which they never will.
Chris, I'm convinced we could talk for another hour and just be absolutely enriching, but we've got to wrap it up. And so you help businesses. Well, let me not put words in your mouth. How do you help businesses? Who do you work with and how do you help them?
So there's three things we primarily do. We work with companies in three deltas. So if you need sales skills, if you just want to uplift your current sales force, we got a ton of very, very cool courses that are done in really, really interesting ways. Like one of the courses that we have is called Leadership Lost. The other one is called Sell the Whole, Not the Drill. Really interesting ways of looking at sales training that's going to immediately make your people better. The second thing we do is something called lift off, and that is creating strategic go-to-markets, utilizing a very cool hierarchy of creating the most self-actualized salespeople on planet Earth. And then the third thing we do is if you're building an enterprise, sorry, if you're building a startup and you're going from startup to scale up, we will build your sales infrastructure. Or if you're an enterprise and you do not know why you are not hitting revenue, we provide that advisement in terms of building your sales engine. Because look, most people make the mistake of thinking that the reason they don't have sales is because their salespeople aren't performing. And that's rarely the case. Often it's far more upstream. So, do we have a C-suite that knows what we're talking about? Do we have sales managers who understand what their jobs are? And are we taking selling seriously to empower salespeople, not blame them? And that's kind of the core of what we do.
Wow, that's cool. And how can people reach you?
So I have a website, obviously, and LinkedIn is probably the best way. My LinkedIn. There's not a lot of shadows in the world, so typing in Chris SZADO will get you connected to me right away on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Now that Zed, that's Queen speak for us in the States. That's Z.
That's a Z. I know. It's always yeah. That reminds me of Tarantino. Zed. Anyway, that's a long ago reference. But yes, that's how you can reach me.
All right. Well, Chris, this has been wonderful. I do hope people reach out to you. I have to say this has been the best sales conversation I think I've had. And thank you for having it on Leaders and Legacies.
It's been a pleasure, Craig. Looking forward to more.